At one time, it seemed like the DCEU was headed for bigger and better things and possibly rivaling Marvel's MCU. That never quite happened. It just never got off its feet. Obviously, Zack Snyder ended up stepping away, or was perhaps made to step away. They brought in a new direction with Joss Whedon. That did not work out. Walter Hamada came in. That did not work out. And it was just too many different visions for one what was supposed to be shared cinematic universe, and we have come to the end of the road with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. It was looking like it was trending poorly, and not shockingly, it did absolutely do poorly. I don't think anyone's too surprised by these results. This was a troubled production, and obviously it is basically a dead franchise at this point. We do have James Gunn, Peter Safran, and the DCU right around the corner, likely kicking off in 2025. With Superman Legacy, although I do believe we're going to get a couple of animated projects before that. Now let's get to the details on what is definitely bad, but what is also not quite as bad as it might appear. Early estimates for Christmas box office have been lowered for many movies after traffic was lighter than expected on Saturday, as consumers instead focused on holiday preparations and other activities. Either way, James Wan's Aquaman The Lost Kingdom is headed for one of the lowest starts in the history of the DC Cinematic Universe, with a projected 4-day domestic gross of $40 million, including $28 million for the 3-day opening weekend. Aquaman 2 is also trailing the recent $46.1 million opening of box office debacle The Marvels from rival Marvel Studios, and it's certainly trailing The Flash, which was considered an enormous bomb at the time, although The Flash does have a much larger budget than Aquaman The Lost Kingdom. The Marvels also has a significantly bigger budget than Aquaman The Lost Kingdom, but Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom also has an enormous budget. I think it's over $200 million. So this is absolutely terrible news, but at this point, I don't know what else they would have expected. Certainly, the first Aquaman movie did quite well. I believe it did over $1 billion. We'll get into some of those hard and fast numbers a little bit later on in the video. And there was probably hope at one last gasp, one last opportunity for Warner Brothers Discovery and the DCEU to maybe make a little bit of money and offset a lot of these enormous losses that they've been experiencing, especially in 2023. But obviously it started in 2022 as well. But Black Adam, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, Flash, Blue Beetle, and now Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom obviously appears to be suffering the same fate, where it's just an enormous money loser, most likely going to be on Max or HBO Go or whatever HBO Warner Brothers streaming platform you have available to you, in the not too distant future. I don't think it's going to take very long as the box office kind of wipes out for this one. Although there is hope. This is only opening day weekend, and there was a lot of negativity surrounding the Marvels that I don't see really surrounding Aquaman The Lost Kingdom. It doesn't sound like it's a great movie, but it does sound like there are some good qualities about it. And if you like Jason Momoa as Arthur Curry, the Aquaman, this might be something that you want to check out, because we're never going to see this again. Basically, Jason Momoa has already confirmed there will not be a third Aquaman movie. He is not continuing in the DCU as Aquaman, although they certainly have taken some bits and pieces and characters and actors from the DCEU and already mentioned that they're going to be in the DCU. Does not sound like Aquaman is going to be a part of that. It sounds like he's likely fated to be Lobo in the not too distant future, if in fact Jason Momoa continues to be attached to the DCU. By all accounts, this is a disaster, but it's not quite as bad as you might imagine. Overseas, it took in $80.1 million from 72 markets, including a promising $30.4 million in China, where it turned it into the biggest start of the year for a Hollywood superhero pick. In 2018, the first Aquaman was the king of the year-end holiday when swimming to a 3-day opening of $67.9 million over December 21st through 23rd weekend. The movie went on to earn $335.1 million domestically and $1.15 billion globally, the best showing ever for a DCEU title, not adjusted for inflation. So that means it did better than the Superman movie, the Justice League movies, and it's certainly done a lot better than almost all the Batman movies. In fact, it might have done better than all the Batman movies. I know The Dark Knight, I believe, is the highest grossing Batman movie of all time, and it probably did better than that as well. Just to give you an idea just how successful Aquaman from James Wan starring Jason Momoa was the first go around. Unfortunately, they were not able to repeat that this weekend, but it did significantly better than the Marvels overseas, doing $80 million. I think the Marvels opened up at more like $62 or $63 million. So when it's all said and done, it's probably quite even on the opening day weekend, and we'll see if it has that enormous drop-off that the Marvels had, which was the biggest drop-off in the history of movies for a superhero film. But I think it was like 68, 70. Maybe it was closer to 80. It was something crazy. So if it can have a little bit of a better hold, it'll do better. Obviously, when you do better overseas than domestically, you need to do better just in general because you get less percentage of the box office gate for your revenue and stuff like that. But there is hope that Aquaman the Lost Kingdom perhaps can do much, much better than the Marvels, which barely broke $200 million worldwide, because it is flourishing quite substantially better overseas, especially in China. When the Aquaman came out, like, it did pretty decent in the US. $330 million is nothing to sneeze at, but it did so much more of its box office overseas, specifically in the Asian market. And it sounds like that'll be the trend here again, but not trending quite nearly as big. But the Aquaman, the first one, kind of grew over time as people realized it was a good movie. Not sure that that's going to happen this time, but I do think in the end, total worldwide box office will likely eclipse the Marvels by a large margin because it is performing well overseas. And I don't think it can have the catastrophic box office decline in week 2 and week 3 that the Marvels had, which was just absolutely staggering and really unprecedented. Although we are in different times now, superheroes aren't the biggest thing in the world. And certainly the DCEU has been a dead property for like well over a year now. I think it's been over a year since James Gunn was announced as the new head of the DCEU. And basically, they kind of killed all the movies sight unseen. Don't invest in any of this stuff because none of it's going to be meaningful and none of it's going to move anything forward because we're just going to scrap all of it and start over. I think in hindsight, probably not the best message to send out there to people. James Wan himself has been trying to kind of remove the DCEU affiliation with Aquaman the Lost Kingdom, saying, no, it's not really attached to any of that other stuff, even though, Jason Momoa as Aquaman is in the Flash movie, trying to do something to salvage all this, and it just didn't end up happening for it. The big budget tentpole re-teaming Wan and star Jason Momoa has been largely rebuked by critics and only earned a B cinema score from audiences. The sequel, which faced a troubled road to the big screen, marks the end of an era as new DC chiefs James Gunn and Peter Safran are set to reboot the DC universe with 2025 Superman Legacy. Wan's movie lends further credence to the superhero fatigue theory. Even the most ardent fanboys are weary. It would be hard to deny that there isn't a little bit of superhero fatigue out there, just with the way that box offices are trending. But I just think there was an overwhelming amount of superhero stuff out there, and a lot of it was really uncreative, regurgitating the same kind of final acts and stuff like that, to where people started saying, hey, I don't need to see all of these because I'm getting a lot of redundancy in these films. I'm going to wait and see the very best superhero movies that are out there. And certainly the MCU kind of shot themselves in the foot, as it hasn't appeared that the MCU has been leading to anything substantial. We have heard there's 2 more Avengers movies out there, but are they really building to them? It doesn't feel like that, where it did in phases 1 through 3. And it almost never felt like that for the DCEU. They never really built anything. They just did stuff. Like, we're going to do a Superman movie, and then they're supposed to do a Batman movie and get to Justice League, but then they decided to just do Justice League, and then it's like, well, let's do the Suicide Squad. And that was kind of successful. Then it wasn't successful, and then they're like, let's do Birds of Prey. Let's do this and then that, and let's do Blue Beetle and Shazam. And it never felt like there was a cohesive strategy or idea of what the DCEU was going to be. And I think that largely was its downfall. That, and obviously having so many different creative voices steering the ship, that it never went in a direction. It just kind of went in circles. And if you're a fan of DC characters, which I certainly am, I'm a bigger fan of DC heroes than I am of Marvel. It's been a whole lot of disappointment for several years now. And it just never really worked out. And Aquaman the Lost Kingdom was a troubled production. I remember all the things happening with Amanda Heard, and then you had the trial, and then like Warner Brothers president or whatever, Walter Hamada, is like doing testimony, on Zoom or whatever, which was really strange. And then obviously they had to do lots of reshoots. Apparently people were walking out of the test screenings because there was potentially a death there that was turning people off. And it just never felt like this movie was going to be able to head in the same direction as the first one and eclipse that $1 billion number, which is something I don't think anyone could have predicted for the first Aquaman movie, because the other DCU properties never really got that high. Even Wonder Woman, which is another huge surprise, didn't make it to $1.15 billion, and they were not able to replicate that this time. Although there hasn't been a ton of marketing put behind this. They didn't have like a sneak peek trailer out months ahead of time. They didn't really start marketing until like 60, 70 days before the movie was even supposed to come out. It was delayed multiple times. And I think the writing was just on the wall. And hopefully James Gunn has a good idea for what the DCU is going to be. And maybe people will give them a third, fourth, fifth chance, whatever it is, to come on board. And perhaps we will see good versions of the DC characters. This was an interesting version of Aquaman. If you're a fan of the comic books, I wouldn't say Jason Momoa's Arthur Curry really encapsulates who Aquaman Arthur Curry is in the comic books, but it was an interesting take and it was popular. People enjoyed this. It's just unfortunate they didn't come back for the last ride, the last gasp of the DCEU, which is basically the final nail in the coffin. The DCEU is no more. The legacy of Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon and Walter Hamada gets laid to rest as we hopefully move into a bigger and better era. And I will be saying goodbye to the DCU and talking about all of this in a much more broader context with my good friend Aaron Sparrow on this week's Geek Fix. But if you would like all of Geek Fix, you're actually going to have to go over to the Patreon to get the full 2-hour podcast. You actually have to back the channel there. Really enjoy those discussions, and we'll definitely be talking more in-depth and further analysis of what happened to Aquaman and Lost Kingdom, why that didn't work out. And obviously we have over 7 hours of new content every single week, exclusive to Patreon. If you haven't checked that out, I do think we have a lot of stuff you would be interested in. There's a link in the video description.